This discussion is going to be interesting because we will be analyzing how the economies of the various societies creates great freedom and prosperity for their citizens internally, but ultimately leads to an undercurrent of control that I'm not convinced anyone ever truly realized. Before I get too far, I will say that this is based on the show specifically. My research includes the dialogue, the scenes, and natural conclusions. The economic theories that worked within this reality and not what you think is actually real. The show's facts don't care about your feelings. Let's just get into it.
A wise man can hear prophet in the wind.
To understand how the Ferengi Alliance would ultimately come into power, you have to first look at the various economies of the major and minor powers within the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Unfortunately, this subject, even though somehow being really important to the creators, is pretty vague. During the 22nd and 23rd centuries, internal economic systems were slowly starting to shift from a capitalist to a more socialistic one. However, even so, in the 22nd century, most major powers still relied on some form of barter system, with ships trading different components or resources for what they needed. There was no large-scale use of any type of fiat currency, at least between major governments that we know of. With the creation of the United Federation of Planets, the joining members would be required to meld their economies into one. At some point, the creation of the Federation credit becomes a standard, though ironically, we only ever see the Federation credit being offered as an option to non-Federation citizens or governments, and even then it's rarely given as an option. Our understanding of non-United Earth and non-Federation economies is also very hazy. However, it appears that many governments have some form of economy that utilized credits or fiat money, at least originally. Again, most economic systems appear self-contained. If governments ever needed to trade outside of their self-contained system, they trade components and resources than any actual fiat money. That's not to say that Latinum wasn't a thing historically. It existed in some form before even the 22nd century. However, its large-scale use isn't apparent from anything that I can find. Episodes, dialogue, and everything I can find would seem to indicate that during the 22nd and early 23rd century, Latinum was utilized by independent governments, like the Ferengi, Cardassians, and others. It wouldn't be a common currency just yet. As the governments continued to evolve, we know that the Federation would stay focused on trade between member worlds and non-member worlds within their borders or near them. Indeed, we see in the Next Generation where cargo is traded between Federation and non-Federation planets. It does reveal a vast power inequality for non-Federation citizens. Possibly due to this, Latinum would become more and more the preference of trade between distinct governmental bodies. If the Federation was required to utilize Latinum, then it would be a more even playing field, especially since Latinum can't be replicated. At least that's what everyone thinks. In fact, Latinum became so prevalent that even bounty hunters that worked for the Federation declined Federation credits in lieu of the Latinum strips themselves. This, honestly, would lead us to the rise of the Ferengi government. Hey guys, I'm excited to tell you about a very cool partnership. Have you ever wanted to be able to share emojis that have audio with your friends via text that are based on this channel? Yeah, me neither. But that won't stop me from trying to sell it to you anyway. EMOJAM is a cool downloadable app that will let you send clips of me and cool GIFs based on the channel. You can click in the link below to download and get your first GIF free. For those who want to be true lore masters, if you become a YouTube member by hitting that cool join option and pledging $5 or more, you'll get even more GIFs based on the channel. That's right, my dearest fans. You can send all kinds of fun emojis to everyone and they'll instantly like you because they'll know my channel. So again, on your phone, click the link below, download EMOJAM and get started, because God knows CBS isn't going to give me money.
Opportunity plus instinct equals profit.
With most governmental economies either being mixed, leaning towards heavily socialist, or outright socialist, a market was slowly beginning to surface as the need for trade between these governments was creeping up. This is where we begin to see the rise of the Ferengi Alliance. Ferengi, being one of the first to utilize latinum as a currency, were perfectly positioned to present themselves as an intermediary between the governments, whether they were minor powers or much more powerful ones. Weapons, food, medicine, subsidies, and more could now be easily traded between two planets or organizational bodies that needed them, for a small fee, of course. This meant that everyone would get what they were looking for, what they needed. With time, this makes the Ferengi one of the most powerful entities in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Think about it. With the ability to trade between hostile species, the Ferengi could mark up the necessities for both sides. After all, war is good for business. In fact, the Ferengi could help slowly manipulate events by assisting one side over the other if they preferred. If one side wasn't preferable, the Ferengi Alliance could require more and more payments for the same amount of goods, and even help the other entity find prospective buyers at discounted rates. This would push the war effort one way or the other. While I realize that some commenters may try to say that I have a lot of inferences in this theory, I really feel confident that they've probably already typed their opinion and have left, so I don't know why I'm going to rebut it, but here we go. This theory, honestly, isn't as lacking as many people think. When we analyze the whole of Star Trek's Deep Space Nine, and specifically episodes that are focused on finding the Founders or trade, we see that Captain Sisko and Starfleet rely heavily on Quark and the Ferengi Alliance to assist them in discovering who the Founders are, as well as creating trade between the two empires, or at least a black market, but we'll get into that in a minute. Through various negotiations, Quark is able to find the Founders for them, something that Starfleet intelligence couldn't even do. And then, when the Dominion forbids trade with the Alpha Quadrant, the Ferengi facilitate a black market so that Alpha Quadrant contraband can get into the Dominion, and Dominion contraband can get back to the Alpha Quadrant. The Federation, as I've said, heavily relies on the Ferengi Alliance when dealing with the Gamma Quadrant initially. This would, again, create a large network of beginning and endpoints all controlled by the Alliance, where goods, and thus information, are bought and sold.
Knowledge equals profit.
Looking at it from another perspective, in Deep Space Nine, we know that Starfleet officers engage in commerce. From what I can tell, they will often, or solely, utilize gold-pressed latinum in their interactions. Given how intricate and close the Ferengi Alliance and Federation are at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the Federation relied on the Ferengi as their banker to one extent or another. We know that Federation schools don't teach commerce. Just look at Jake or other main characters in both DS9 and TNG, and their lack of understanding at the concept of money is startling to say the least. This means that Starfleet and the Federation would need someone who understands the practice to ensure that officers and citizens who aren't near the Federation borders are taken care of. The Ferengi, for all intents and purposes, now have their tendrils within the Alpha, Beta, and Gamma quadrants. While we know ties to the Gamma quadrant would be cut off, this is, of course, temporary, and so ultimately trade would be restored. Previously, I did say that a lot of this isn't based on inference, but logical deduction and actual evidence. I even pointed out that people who will try to claim I'm making all of it up are less than informed. But I'll admit they aren't completely wrong. We know that the Federation in the 24th century and other organizations do engage in some trade independent of the Ferengi. It is quite possible that the system isn't as clean as I'm making it out to be. But even if we assume it's messier than what can be seen, that the Federation does trade outside of the Ferengi some, which economies are pretty messy, the Ferengi still hold an amazing amount of power and capital position. And in the end, that does lead us to examining the universe overall. Here's where the great triggering of the video likely begins. The fact is, within the Star Trek universe at a minimum, we are told through dialogue, events, and visual cues that the socialistic or mixed economies that are post-scarcity heavily rely on pure capitalistic or near pure capitalistic entities to exist and keep the balance of power. The Ferengi, a capitalistic nation, facilitates trade. It opens up new borders and negotiations. It can manipulate galactic affairs to sway in the way that they want to. They can make or break multi-quadrant events. We know that because of the power they have, they don't like going to war. They don't need to. They stay away from it. War isn't necessary for them usually. The amount of leverage with their trading partners can cripple even a pure socialist society. In an era where, from each according to his ability to each according to his need reigns supreme, capitalism found a way. If the Federation, the Romulans, the Klingons, and others are the machines that make things move, then surely the Ferengi are the nuts and bolts that keep that machine running. But all of this is really Just my opinion based on the actual series, but still some inference I'll admit. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded. What's up, Lore Masters?